lot of people don't know this about you. This is a crazy story from when you were growing up. You had an encounter with someone that turned out to be a really dangerous person.
I was in my mid-teens. I used to hitchhike a lot. I lived down in Laguna Beach, and I would meet my friends down in San Clemente, so I'd get out on Coast Highway, and I would hitchhike. And at this point in my life, I looked like a little surfer kid, you know, long blonde hair, and I used to wear these like karate pants because I was really into karate, and you know.
And this was what, like early 80s?
Oh no, even earlier than that.
Late 70s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, late 70s. The hitchhiking back then was commonplace.
Right.
Everybody was hitchhiking. So I get picked up by this guy, and don't think anything of it. You know, I hitchhike every day. And I do recall, though, him offering me a beer. And I was already drinking at that age. But I declined the beer only because it was so early in the morning. You know, it was just like, you know, not even 10 o'clock, I don't think. And he offers me a beer, and I decline it. I said, no, thanks, I'm good. And then at some point shortly thereafter, he puts his hand on my knee. But it's Laguna Beach. So again, it's nothing really too unusual about this thing. He's picking up a young kid, but he puts his hand on my knee, and I just take his hand and place it back into the center console area. And I was like, hey, you know, you can just let me off. And that was it. It was, you know.
He let you pulled over and...
Yeah, he just pulled over and let me off.
What was his demeanor? Was he nervous or...
No, his demeanor was just very casual. You know, like a friendly guy. Hey, where are you going? You know, I can take you halfway there or whatever it was. I can give you a ride, and that was all there is to it. Hey, you want a beer? No, I'm cool. I don't need one. He's like, all right. And then he puts his hand on my leg, and, you know, he realizes that I'm, you know, not going to be receptive to that. And then he's cordial about it. He's like, yeah, and he lets me off and don't think anything about it.
Yeah.
It's just another weird day. Until years later, and now I'm a deputy sheriff in the Orange County Jail. And I'm not really even aware that there's a person in custody there named Randy Kraft. But I do remember going on a ride-along, which when you're a jail deputy, you know, your aspirations are to get out on patrol eventually. So you could sign up to go do ride-alongs where you get to go out and ride along with a patrol deputy and experience a little bit of what it'll be like to ultimately get out of the jail. So I was with a guy, I think it was a guy named Ronnie Robertson, and for whatever reason, he had to go to where Orange County sheriffs kept all of their, it was like their evidence center, their evidence warehouse. Just hundreds of bicycles and computers and everything that goes into evidence is stored there. And I remember specifically, I was kind of wandering around while he was taking care of his business. I was just like looking at all this stuff in this huge evidence warehouse. And I saw this vehicle, and it was a brown Toyota Celica. And eventually Ronnie had come up to me, and he's like, yeah, you know whose car that is? I'm like, I have no idea. But there was something registering in my mind. I couldn't even put it together yet.
Right. Just familiar.
I'm just like, oh, that's, yeah. And he goes, yeah, that's the guy who's over in the county jail, the serial killer. I'm like, who? It's like, this guy named Randy Kraft. He's over there. He's looking at, you know, he's on trial for killing a bunch of young boys. And now it's just starting to, and so I go back to the jail eventually, and I go and I look at who he is. He is in protective custody, but, you know, as a jail deputy, you can kind of roam around and go, like Richard Ramirez is there and other notable guys. And I remember going and looking at Randy Kraft, and then it all connected. I'm like, holy shit. That was the guy who picked me up years ago. And then I started to get to know the MO of his story and what he would do in almost every single one of his murders. Is that he would take a vulnerable young guy who's either already drunk, leaving a bar, or some kid like me who's just hitchhiking, some wayward kid, and he'd offer him a beer. But the beers were already laced with barbiturates, and that's how he would incapacitate you.
How would he lace them?
Yeah, I mean, you can just recap. They were Canadian beer.
They were bottled.
I think
okay.
They were Molson. Like there was a Canadian beer. It was a green bottle, and that's what kind of was distinctive about it. And back then, there weren't a lot of varieties of beer. It's not like today,
right?
You know,
there were like 5 beers.
Yeah, there was like Heineken was green and Molson and, you know,
right,
whatever they were. But I remember specifically that was another key element in me kind of coming to the conclusion that I had been picked up by him. Is he had offered me a beer, I remember it being it was a green ball he kept in a 6-pack behind the seat. And that's what he would do. He would lace them, recap them, offer you one, and the next thing you know, you're incoherent and you can't put up a fight. And then, there's a very distinct MO that he used against his victims and to kill them. And, just by the grace of God, I didn't accept that beer that morning, because it would have been the end of me.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty awful guy. He would basically mutilate his victims while they were still alive.
Brutal.
Sexually assault them and then kill them.
He would emasculate them, and it's disturbing.
Yeah.
Randy Kraft, he was convicted of multiple murders, and he kept what was known as a scorecard, and that was one of the ways that they were tying him to a whole bunch of unsolved murders.
And one of his nicknames is the scorecard killer. That's one of his monikers, right?
Right, exactly.
And it was like a coded sheet, and they've been able to assign a lot of the initials and names to victims that they know, but there's still a bunch of unsolved ones, right?
Yeah, there was 60 some odd names on that list, and probably 2/3 of them they've connected to bodies, but there's at least 1/3 of them that have never been solved.
I mean, he's still in prison. He's got life in prison. He's still alive.
He got the death penalty, but of course, it's been 40 years.
Right.
He got the death penalty, and of course, the governor commuted death penalties, put a moratorium on him.
And how was he? Tell the story about how he was arrested. So it's a crazy story.
Yeah, just by fate, I guess. It was late at night. He's on the 5 freeway, and he's swerving. California Highway Patrol sees a vehicle. It's kind of swerving. I think the lights were off or something that brought their attention to their car, and they pulled him over and noticed that he had the little orange pill bottles, prescription pill bottles. And then asked if he had been drinking. He said he'd had a few drinks, but he's fine, and that he's just trying to get his friend home. And his friend, who was in the passenger seat, appeared to be sound asleep. So they pull him out and they give him a field sobriety test, and they're doing their preliminary investigation for drunk driving. And they get him out, and one of the CHP officers went up to inspect the condition of the passenger. And he opened the door, and the passenger's non-responsive, and he checks and sees that he's not breathing, and that he's dead, and that there was a jacket on his lap, and he removed the jacket, and his pants and everything were unbuckled, and so now you have a dead body in the car. And one thing led to another. He was a young Marine. This unknown serial killer was known for picking up and so now they start to connect the dots with all these different agencies.
They knew they were looking for someone that was targeting Marines in bars and stuff like
Correct.
that. And now you got a dead Marine and
Correct.
This guy. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. And so they arrest him for DUI and for investigation for this possible homicide. And they found out that the guy was murdered, and that led to solving all these other cases and prosecuting him. And yeah, he's the serial killer nobody's ever heard of.
It's crazy. He's one of the deadliest serial killers in history, and people don't know that name, Randy Kraft.
Yeah.
He's not a household name like
Right.
a lot of the others. And he wasn't one of his MOs that he was dumping a lot of the bodies off the side of the freeway, and that maybe what he was doing with this guy was he was done with them and was going to dump them somewhere.
Yeah, he had dumped other bodies in that general area, like on the Ortega Highway and just along the freeways in Orange County. And a lot of the bodies would be partially clothed, and a lot of them would have skid marks on them, so it was clear they were being pushed out of a moving vehicle. So that was kind of one of the consistent MOs, is that he'd get them, kill them somewhere, and abuse them, because most of them were sexually assaulted while they were still alive. And then they would, he'd either suffocate them or asphyxiation or bleed out because he would,
right.
He'd cut them and then push them out of the car, and they'd get discovered by somebody who driving to work in the morning, like a clump of, flesh on the side of the road.
Crazy.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Like, life is it's so funny, these experiences and encounters you have. And you're so fortunate that you could have been, things could have gone so differently if circumstances were just slightly different. Because I worked for this guy named John Famalaro. This is before I became a cop. And he was called the maintenance man. And I was a painter. I worked for him. He would contract painting jobs out to me. But I always remember something just being a little bit off about the guy. We weren't friends, but we were associates, and he was a guy that I worked for.
Right.
And then years later, this girl goes missing from Seal Beach. She's abducted and goes missing. She's missing for years. And then finally, in Arizona, there's a U-Haul that's parked outside of a home. And the U-Haul has an extension cord that's going from the U-Haul into the home. And it just, for some reason, raises some suspicion from some neighbors.
Right.
And one thing leads to, for whatever reason, the cops get the probable cause to go on the property and inspect the U-Haul, and there's a freezer in there. And this girl's in the freezer. She's been dead there for years, and it's kept her there frozen for years. And it was John Famalaro. He was the suspect that had killed her. And I'm like, damn, it's just like, how?
Was he suspected of doing others? Or
no, I think it's just that one.
Wild.
As far as I know. And of course, he was convicted and sent to prison for that. But it's weird, you encounter these people in your life, and they're murderers. And you could have been a murder victim, and then you go on to be a murder investigator.
Right. Do you think that influenced?
I don't know. I never really thought about it like that. But I guess there is some irony there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.